All right, all right. It's episode 143 of the James Fox Higgins Show, and I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. E. Michael Jones. Doctor, how are you today?
Good, good. Beautiful day, spring day in South Bend, Indiana.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Yeah, we've got beautiful weather, autumnal weather here in Australia. So we're speaking from Antipodean positions virtually, and
That's
it's
right.
great. It's great to have you. I really enjoyed your conversation recently with my friend Dia. It was nice to
Ah.
see you blush when she called you beautiful. A nice touch. So for those who don't know, get out from under your rock. Dr. Jones is a prolific author. He's the founder of Culture Wars magazine and the author of many books, one of which I've been reading and enjoying and finding very informative and fascinating lately, which is The Jews and Moral Subversion, which I believe is a condensed version of your book on the Jews, the revolutionary spirit of the Jews. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Mm. And you speak on a lot of really important topics. You have a new book just out, which oddly enough we chose the same title for our new projects. Your new book, my new album, both called Logos Rising, and we will get into, I guess, what that means for each of us today in our conversation. But with
Yeah.
regards to the Jews and moral subversion, what I've been finding most interesting is your discussions on the degeneration of Western architecture and art and the general aesthetic of the West that's been imposed by modernism. And I wonder if we could sort of kick off our conversation today by you sharing your thoughts on the logos of the arts, because this is something that's obviously very important
Yes.
to me.
Yes. Yes. The logos of the arts is called mimesis, which is imitation.
Mm,
Imitation of reality in a way that makes the reality more real. And I've been thinking about this lately in terms of how art is so fundamental to human existence, because it's a refined version of what we call labor as well. So what do I mean by art? To give you one example, there's a block of marble. There's Michelangelo, and he's got an idea. And so what he does is he imposes his idea on that block of marble, and then you have Moses. You have the sculpture of Moses. I think that's pretty much the whole, the summation of human history. It's the summation of labor, and it's also pretty much the summation of the role of logos in the universe. What we're seeing here is the ability of the human mind to discern order, to have an idea of order, and then to impose that order on the world in a way that makes the world better. Now, that's, as I said, mimesis, which means an imitation, of something or other that makes that thing more valuable. Beginning in the 20th century, we had a reaction against mimesis. And the artist became not so much somebody who humbly stood there and tried to report back on what he saw, but he imposed his reality in a totally, what should I say, selfish, self-centered, egotistical way. And the man who pioneered this vision was Picasso, who had talent, but he abused it. He was a man who was a kind of Nietzschean. There's a way in which Michelangelo imposed his idea on nature, and there's a way in which Nietzsche said that the ultimate reality is human will, and you can impose it on anything, and you can do anything you want because you're the Superman, because you impose your will on others. We call these people egomaniacs or megalomaniacs, and we try to avoid them. But unfortunately, the 20th century is littered with people like this. So what happens here when you do this is you break away from mimesis, and it's you create an impoverished art world. It's after a while you kind of know what there's nothing in your mind really that is sophisticated as the reality outside your mind. And so over this period of time, we went from Picasso to farther and farther away to abstract expressionism, to Mondrian. And at a certain point, everybody started to lose interest. So to get back to the idea of art, I went to see the Rubens exhibit in the Toledo Art Gallery, about 5 hours away. And we got there and there were so many people, we had to wait in line. And so I went to the 50s wing, and that was abstract expressionism, which is basically, it's just a pattern. And then that inevitably, when everybody got sick of that, it went in the opposite direction. And that meant the 70s wing, which was hyperrealism, which was basically people taking pictures and then you project the slide onto a canvas and then you kind of fill in the dots. It's like kind of like paint by numbers. And the one was, so you had with the abstract, you had essence without existence. And with the 70s, you had existence without essence. So the one is abstract, the other is looking out the window. That's life. Okay, it's life, but life is not organized.
That phenomenon in the 70s seemed to really come through into the film genre as well. I noticed, I remember feeling a real stark and quite unnerving and disturbing realism in the films of the 70s that I watched when I was young, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, but films like The Deer Hunter and what's another good example?
These were taboo, breaking taboos, and we could talk about that. The Jews were
Deliverance was another. Deliverance was a big one, in terms of trying to break taboos, wasn't it?
But Rubens, I walked in, finally got into the Rubens exhibit, and there's the portrait of the Princess Spinola Doria, and I thought, this is perfectly organized, and it's real at the same time, and that's art. Okay, when you have existence and essence together. If you have the correspondence, Aquinas said, the correspondence of reality of the mind and the thing, it's the truth. And when you have that correspondence in a really powerful, stunning way, all at once in a big burst, it's called the splendor of the truth, or we call that beauty. And so I've had these experiences. That was one of the aesthetic, most significant aesthetic experiences I've ever had. I had another one when I visited the Taj Mahal in India, where you have to walk or take a camel cart for a mile. You go through a huge gate and then you walk out and you suddenly perceive everything all at once. It's the most perfectly organized landscape and building you can imagine. And it all appears to you at once and you're just stunned by the aesthetic beauty of it. And then you walk inside and you realize it's an empty tomb and you're disappointed. But that moment when you saw that, it was absolutely stunning.
So what happened? That's a good segue into.
Let's get back to the original question. Is
sure.
So when you get somebody like Jackson Pollock, who Time Magazine called him Jack the Dripper because he would drip paint onto a canvas. You can't perceive it. You can't perceive any order in it. You don't see any logos in it. You would not know whether you were hanging that painting right side up or upside down. You wouldn't know. And oftentimes they get hung upside down. So at this point,
there is no gravity.
I don't understand what I'm saying. At this point, the CIA stepped in. Nelson Rockefeller started buying these paintings and putting them up on the walls of the Chase Manhattan Bank. So everybody walked in and they thought, I must be stupid because if Nelson Rockefeller's buying it, it must be art and I don't know what I'm talking about. And at that point, the dealer became more important than the artist. And at this point, you're seeing the rise of the Jewish takeover of art because it started with Picasso. But at this point, you don't know, you can't tell. I mean, so what the dealer is now involved in something you would call insider trading, which is basically if you've got a lot of money and you want to invest it in art, the dealer will say, if you buy this one, it'll be worth such and such 10 years from now, which is true because everybody's buying it. It's like stock. If everybody buys the stock, the price goes up. So it's not art. But at this point, the Jews got their foot in the door. And then once they get their foot in the door, they start doing their thing. And their thing over this period of time turned out to be, it wasn't abstract expressionism. That was just at the beginning. It turns out it's blasphemy and it's pornography. And then it becomes a concept, performance art, and then everybody loses interest. Everybody walks out.
Yeah,
and that's where we
except
are
perhaps
today.
the criminally insane, and now we've got performance artists like Marina Abramovich doing simulated cannibalism, possibly real cannibalism behind the scenes. We couldn't possibly know.
Right. She's got something. Yeah, that was worth talking about, because there's a very telling picture. She's standing next to Mr. Rothschild, and so she's the oligarch's idea of a great artist, and she must. So she's now got something that's virtual. So you have to put the glasses on. But this was what happens when Jews take over art. They define it as what they can do, and what they can do is not art. Sorry, it's not art. So when Marina sits there with her boyfriend and stares at him for 7 hours, it's not art. Sorry, it's some transgressive act that's supposed to make us feel stupid, and it's supposed to make her feel superior because somebody is paying her to do that. But it's not art.
And there's a lot of links in there. Going back to Michelangelo, you were saying that art is mimesis, so it's the imitation of something, and obviously the best thing that we can imitate is the Lord, is Jesus Christ, is God, and the way that we can do that is to see the logos and the order in creation itself, to see the majesty and the beauty and the symmetry and the amazing mathematics available to us in nature.
Right.
And the best of art, in my estimation, is where we have imitated God's order and attempted to bring it into our own creation.
Yes, but that requires a lot of skill. And so the group of people, so I've already talked about the Jews. If you let the Jews take over the art world, you'll get this performance art, pornography, blasphemy, crucifixes submerged in urine, stuff like that. But the Italians have a tradition. I mean, they have a real tradition of art. And if you look at somebody like Titian, okay, we're talking about religious art now in the late Middle Ages, the Renaissance. And there's a standard, one of the standard images is Noli me tangere, don't touch me. And I was just looking at this picture, famous picture, and there is the picture of Jesus Christ. The story is familiar. It's the resurrection. It's Easter Sunday morning. And Mary Magdalene goes and she thinks it's the gardener. It turns out to be Jesus Christ himself, risen from the dead. And he's got the perfect body now, but the perfect body still has wounds as the symbol of his suffering for our sins. And so there's a picture there. And this picture, I realized, actually it was Michael Waldstein who gave a lecture on it at Notre Dame during the conference in November, where he talked about the psychological sophistication of what's going on here. So you have the gaze. She's reaching towards Christ's genitals. That's what she's doing, because this is a kind of normal reaction between a man and a woman. There's always going to be this dynamic of seeking union with the beloved, which means sexual union. Usually that's what it means in this life. And people seek that. But then she's looking at the wound. And so the psychological dynamic here is, we know we have this desire for union that is usually sexual union, but Christ is raising that to a higher level. And the whole idea of Christianity is basically to take that basic drive and not to deny it, but to sublimate it. What do we mean by sublimate? I mean, subordinate it to logos. Subordinate it to reason. And the way we do that is through marriage.
Yes.
And marriage then becomes the successful channeling of that sexual urge into a rational form that then allows it to be fruitful. So children come out of that, and society comes out of that, and that makes what most people would call a successful life.
And from that's
the successful life that most people are called to.
from that little seed of logos, we now have a whole structure for sexual morality in society, which is where the modern arts seem to be attacking most fervently, the destruction of that structure for sexual morality.
Right. So what is Jack the Dripper telling us? There is no logos. And if there's no logos, then you don't have to discipline your passions. You can do whatever you want. And that is precisely the message that Rockefeller was trying to say by buying up all those paintings. So there were stories about it when the whole story came out about the CIA getting involved in promoting abstract expressionism. This was to show that the United States was superior to the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union had socialist realism. And to be honest with you, the Soviet Union has created some of the greatest statues, I think, in European history. We may not like Lenin. He was a monster. But that statue of Lenin, when you're coming into St. Petersburg, is absolutely stunning piece of sculpture. So they did do some good things with socialist realism. But the United States was going to say, no, we have freedom here. You can do whatever you want here. You can drip paint on a canvas and people will pay you lots of money for it. Well, no, that's not true. That's not true. You can do what the rich and the powerful want. And this is the whole point of sexual liberation, the book I wrote about libido dominandi, this manipulation of sexual passion to give you the illusion of freedom, but the reality of control. And that's what is going on here during this period of time. This is the era of Kinsey. Rockefellers were promoting Kinsey because Kinsey was a way of controlling large numbers of people. It's in my book, Libido Dominandi. I found it at the Rockefeller Archives when I did research there. So that's the illusion and the reality. This is what is the art. Art is more real than reality. That's why it's art. That's why it's art. I mean, you can look out the window. You can look out the window, and it's real, but it's not art. And you can doodle. You can write little squares and triangles, and it's organized. But it's not real. This is a copy of Logos Rising. I'm shamelessly plugging this book here, but I wanted to talk about the cover. The cover, this is my grandson Tim did the cover.
It looks a bit impressionist.
It does have an impressionist feel to it.
And at least the water.
So there's a little bit of symbolism here. There's a church there, and there's a skyscraper here, and this is the city of God and the city of man. That's the symbolism. Yes. But I remember. What did I have in mind here? What did I have? Because I told him what to do. He didn't design it. I designed it. He executed, but I designed it. What was I talking about? Well, that's a river, and there's a river that flows through South Bend, Indiana, called the St. Joseph River, and I rode on it today. Great day to row, no wind, it was perfect. Now, I have had basically 40 years of experience of this river at all times of day, all the seasons of the year, and I just had all of these images in mind. So in the summer, to avoid the heat, I'll row at 6 o'clock in the morning at sunrise. And at sunrise, you can see that. You can see the sun come up over the river. Okay, I walk in the winter because I can't do anything else. And you walk along the river and you see the clouds, you see the lights, like those yellow lights when they go whole. Now, all of these experiences have been put together in an organized fashion. That's what I'm saying here. I saw this at one point. I saw that at one point. I saw those clouds at one point, and it's all put together in some type of organized fashion. And that's what art is. That's why we have art. You can kind of distill this experience. So you can distill it with other things as well, like Shylock is a character in a play. He never lived, but he's in many ways, he's more real than all the Jews you've met.
Because he's an archetype.
He's like a synthesis of all of the Jews that you've ever talked to. And that's why it's so powerful. That's why art is so significant, because the mind can synthesize things that you've seen it, you saw all those pieces at various points over 40 years of walking along the river, rowing on the river, sitting at the river, and so on and so forth. And trying that here you can put it all together in some type of organized fashion that you would call beauty.
Now, the music medium, which is my medium, has really followed a similar path to the visual arts that we've been talking about thus far, where what's now popular music. I'm sure there's always been a genre of plebeian entertainment music compared to the high art aspects of music, but what's now popular music and commercialized music and the huge multi-billion-dollar industry which is coming out of Hollywood as well, is also very much on track to take the most basic sort of primitive tribal instincts of man and just pump them right up and get them excited about more and more sexual degeneracy, to the point where I've had to really walk away from a lot of my involvement in the music industry and in listening to music. And now I can only sort of stomach classical music these days because I can hear the darkness and the degeneracy in what's being promoted to us. And you have to really dig to find high quality, artful, logos rich music that's promoting a positive message for society. So can you talk about how, in your perception, because you're a musician as well, I've heard some of your songs, in fact, which I've really enjoyed. I love your Neocon song in particular.
Thank you.
But how music has been used as a propaganda tool to aid along this degeneracy, and why, on the sort of political front, is this happening in the arts? How does it serve the people who are pushing this artistic degeneracy?
Yeah, well, that's a big slice to talk about. But we're talking about, if you're talking about music, you're talking about motions of the soul, sound affecting motions of the soul, and Aristotle talked about it in his Poetics. I never really understood the Poetics fully until I realized he was talking about music and that whole motion of the soul. And at the time of the Greeks, they realized that certain modes had certain effects on you, and you found it hard to resist, and some modes were too passionate, and some modes would make you want to kiss your girlfriend, and some would make you want to go off to war. And so Plato decided you have to regulate these things if you want an ordered society. And if you didn't, you'd have disordered music being produced by disordered souls, and then you'd have revolution, which is what we got. Or you could have Euripides talking about the Bacchae, which is the Dionysian god. Dionysus arrives and corrupts the women, gets them off dancing naked on the mountainside. And the vehicle for this is wine and song. Wine,
and
women,
R&B.
and song. Actually, wine, women, and song. So they understood, the Greeks understood the power of music and how it could go directly to the soul. And so we had basically in European culture, we had more and more sophisticated forms of music, a real cultural development, culminating, I think, in the 18th century with some of the greatest music that was ever made. And at that point, something happened called the French Revolution. And you can see it, you can hear it in Beethoven. Beethoven was an exact contemporary of Hegel. And both of these men were affected directly by the French Revolution. It took place when they were teenagers, 19 years old, both of them 19 years old, and both of them were affected by it. And you can see, Beethoven starting off with the 18th century and then getting involved in revolution, and it's getting wilder and wilder. And then suddenly he makes it back, and everybody heaves a sigh of relief. He made it back. It's okay. Or like the classic instance being the Sixth Symphony, which is basically about a walk in the park.
Yeah.
And suddenly a thunderstorm comes up, and this is what music is. I've often said it's like rowing. You get in the boat, you head up to Mishawaka upstream, And then suddenly the thunderstorm rolls in, and you're out there in the middle, and the lightning's coming down, and the thunder and the rain, and you think, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And then finally I make it back to the dock, and I'm still alive. And you just heave a sigh of relief. Well, that's what music is. I mean, really sophisticated music is basically you have this experience. It's catharsis. It's pity and fear. And your emotions are aroused, and then it's resolved, and you heave a sigh of relief. It's literally what happens in the Sixth Symphony, because there's a thunderstorm in the Sixth Symphony.
Yeah.
Or this the storm at sea that's in Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. Powerful piece of music. So it's just one powerful piece of music after another, but suddenly the idea of revolution starts insinuating itself, and you get a guy like Wagner, and you realize he left and he never came back. He never found his way back to that note that you started off on. There's no resolution. I'm talking about Tristan und Isolde, which is his basically attempt at sexual revolution in Germany at that period of time. He also wrote the Das Rheingold, which is the most brilliant explication of capitalism ever created. It's an absolutely brilliant piece, a brilliant analysis of what happened in Germany with the emancipation of the Jews and the turning gold into usury and all this other. It's brilliant. But with the other part of it, with Tristan, we got away from that, the chromatics, the diatonic scale. We got into this chromatic scale, and it became like you just sailed off and you never came back again. And Schoenberg was a Jew who had become a Christian at this point. He was influenced by it. Verklärte Nacht is a smeared version of Tristan, a smeary version of Tristan. And it was his involvement with, he got involved in sexual, he was living the life of Bohemia in Vienna, and his wife got involved in sexual liberation, had an affair with an artist. The artist committed suicide, and this something cracked inside of Schoenberg. He stopped being a Christian. He reverted to being a Jew. And now he was going to use music to punish this Christian culture that got his wife to cheat on him. And so the first step was atonal music. This is all, by the way, it's all in my book, Dionysus Rising, if you want to read
another one on the list. You've written far too many books for me to keep up, Dr. Jones.
Well, you have what can I say? You've got a lot spare time now since you're all locked inside. Read the books. But anyway, so you have this Jewish animosity coming up, this Jewish hatred of the great achievements of the West, because the West at this point is betraying its own legacy, which is what Wagner did as a revolutionary. That's what revolutionaries do. And so Schoenberg sets off to avenge himself on the Western music, and he comes up with 12-tone music, which is an abomination. It's not music, and he didn't invent it anyway. He stole it from Joseph Matthias Hauer. Oh, I tell that story in the book. You can read it in there.
It seems that we're in that period of Western history where we moved from the diatonic to the chromatic. In modern music now, we've moved from the pentatonic, the 5-note scale of the 1950s pop blues kind of basic pop music. Now we've moved into this sort of monotone music where it's all about the beat and atonal melody. Now it's all rap and beat.
Right. No melody. It's not. Yeah. It's not. There's no melody. Melody is the soul. Is the soul of music. Melody is the soul. The beat is the id, and the melody is the ego. Is the intelligence, ethos, pathos, and the rhythm, harmony is what brings them together in the middle. So you basically walked away from music. You walked away, but the big step here that took you in that direction was basically jazz. So the jazz bands, George Antal said, if we had to hear one more piece by Schoenberg, we all would have committed suicide. So it was with great relief that we welcomed the first Negro jazz band to Paris in 1919. And suddenly Dionysian music took off in a completely different direction, emphasizing rhythm, which is not emphasized at all in Tristan and Isolde. I guarantee you that. It's a completely different idea. And that led to the pop music that we have today, rock and roll and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But the point, I mean, listening to your piece there, I was thinking, this is the root of all of our music is ethnic music. It's basically, we speak a language. This is Rayfun Williams wrote a book called National Music, which was a series of lectures he gave at Bryn Mawr in the 1930s. And he said, all music is ethnic music. It's just that some people are much more sophisticated. So if you bumped into Bach on the street, you would say, Entschuldigung, because he speaks German. And he would say, okay, kein Problem, because we speak German. Well, his music is German too, because his music is a combination of hymns he's heard and songs that they sang in the local pub and so on and so forth. But he took that to such a high level that only a genius could do that. But the point I'm trying to make here is, if you're talking about Bach as the top of the mountain, you're talking about a mountain too, and that mountain is made up of folk music. And so what you have, I mean, there was obvious Irish influence in that piece you did. It reminded me of "Carry Me Back to Carlow" or whatever. I think that was the tune. But what's the difference between I'm half Irish and I'm half German, so I've pondered this. What's the difference between the Irish and the Germans? The Irish have a huge repertoire of folk music, but they lived under the heel of the British, who tried to destroy their culture. There was a time in Irish history when the Irish were not allowed to own musical instruments, if you can imagine that. And they carried that musical tradition forward by humming. And so what happened here, the reason you heard that song that I sang is there was a kind of renaissance of Irish music here in South Bend around the end of the 1990s, the beginning of the 2000s, where suddenly, I had played in a rock band in Germany. I got tired of that kind of music, and then I listened to classical music for about 20 years, and I got tired of listening to other people play music. I thought, I'll play my own, and I'll write my own lyrics, and I'll try and say something that nobody else has said. And that led to that, doing that,
Everyone go and look up the Neocon song by Dr. E. Michael Jones. It's a great hoot.
Yeah, I sang that to a bunch of lumberjacks in Wisconsin. And
they enjoyed it.
With some success. They enjoyed it. Yeah, we had a good time.
Yeah, so I like this idea of the... Sorry, go on.
I'm saying that we're always, in a sense, trying to get back to our roots, and the roots are ethnic music. We have all of these ethnic melodies, especially if you're Irish or German. They're all going around in your mind.
Yeah.
And suddenly, if you have some talent, you can create something new. Now, the difference between, as I was going to say, difference between Ireland and Germany is the Irish are never allowed to have a high musical culture. The British prohibited it. There was a time when they had to say mass in fields. And so this led to this silent mass and the Irish kind of devotion. It never took place in Germany. That's why I have multiple personality disorder. They have two completely different attitudes, two completely different experiences that got brought together in the United States.
Yes.
But the principle is the same. You had a guy like Turlough O'Carolan, who wrote beautiful melodies, beautiful pieces, but there was no mountain there. He had to stand on the street level, whereas Bach could stand on a mountain, because he had all of that sophisticated German musical tradition behind him that he could bring to some type of fruition in a way that no one had ever done before. That's the difference.
This question of music being ultimately ethnic. I think you're spot on with that, and it's interesting for me. I really didn't appreciate classical music. Especially German classical music was nothing to me when I was young. My grandfather listened to it quite a lot, and he was a devout proponent of Logos, let's say that, and that influence was there. But he was an Irishman, And you know, I'm by and large Irish ethnically. I'm the first of my people to be born in Australia, and you know, for me, Irish folk music, you know, like the type that I'm emulating there in my own mimesis with the song you heard at the start, for me, that has always really stirred my soul much more than the high German classical music, even though I've really learned to appreciate, and I sit there and I listen to something like Beethoven's Sixth Symphony and I'm just awestruck at its beauty, at its logos, at the complexity of it, at the mood that the journey Beethoven's able to take me through in that
emotions
piece.
that he can evoke by that music. It's stunning. It is stunning. But
for me, it's not as visceral. It's not as visceral as the Irish folk songs, which don't take you on as nearly as much of a journey. It's sort of one emotional state through a song, but it moves me so much more.
Right. I had the same feeling, but slightly different. So we would go to the pub and we'd sit there and we'd play Irish dance tunes. And we'd play a million Irish dance tunes, you know, one after another. No one's dancing because people don't know how to dance in South Bend. Most people don't. And we're playing one after the other. And then at a certain point, I just thought, I feel a song coming on. And then I'd start to sing. And it turns out usually it would be a German melody. I don't know. I just don't know why. I mean, I just don't know why. I just tended to when it was singing, I tended to gravitate toward the German side.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would posit the theory that it's to some degree it's in our genes, it's in our material makeup. You know, we are who we are, and this is, I guess, I don't really want to go down the political path too much today, but this is why I've come to nationalism as being a proper logos-driven political perspective, because we are who we are. And this is why, you know, the America First movement has struck me, and I think a lot of the rest of the world, seeing it re-emerge, particularly in these young guys who've taken you on as their internet dad, and you know, returning to the idea that America is not just anyone who shows up. America is actually the posterity of the founders of America. America is a race essentially, and there are immigrants who have come and integrated into that pool of people, but the races are real, the ethnicities are real, and our culture is not just mimetic, it's also genetic to some degree. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah. Well, America's an idea, you know, but in the beginning, it was all one group of people, basically. It was English Protestants of some sort or other. And gradually other groups started to show up, and the Catholics showed up in the middle of the 19th century. The Germans and the Irish pretty much showed up at the same time. The Irish showed up because of the potato famine, and the Germans showed up largely because of the Revolution of 1848. So they both took place at the same time. There was I wrote a chapter in Barren Metal on the Irish potato famine, and there's always this image that struck me of the Irish showing up in Glozeel in the St. Lawrence River, and they're naked. Okay, they've got absolutely nothing. And they're sick and they're starving, and they crawl out onto the dock there, and it's winter, you know, it's freezing cold, and some of the people help them, give them clothing, something like that. And at the same time, the Germans go sailing by, and they're all well dressed and they're well fed, and they're all singing songs as they go sailing by. I mean, these were the two experiences of my heritage, you know, because I'm German and Irish, and I never, to be honest with you, I get into trouble when I say this, but I never felt that I was white. We grew up in ethnic neighborhoods in Philadelphia.
And if you're half Irish, everybody knows that the Irish are the blacks of Europe.
Right, I know. I watched that movie. It was called The Commitments, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
But it was so it was. I got into trouble. Because there were people, I met these white boys from the South, and I kept saying, well, yeah, I understand what you're saying, because it was a big deal for you because there was such a large black population. You're picking cotton and stuff like that. But that wasn't the experience of Philadelphia or Chicago or those places. And it became our experience after World War II, when the social engineers used migration. They weaponized migration before anybody knew you could weaponize it. and basically destroyed those Irish ethnic neighborhoods, the German ethnic neighborhoods, the Italians, the Poles, and turned them all into white boys in the suburbs. So that was just part of my experience, and it's difficult to explain to people because it's not obvious what you are when your parents come from two different. I can speak German, but my mother was 100% German, and she couldn't speak a word because she had lost that.
Yeah.
So what was she? Did she lose her identity? And so I'm half Irish and half German. Well, what identity do I have? Well, the identity I have is I'm a Catholic. That's the triple melting pot. That's the story. That's the best description of ethnicity in the United States that I've come across. Now, I said this in a talk, and the white boys got upset, because the white boys, they have a different explanation. I was going to debate Jared Taylor in Zagreb. That got called off because of the COVID virus. But it's an issue. I keep trying to explain it, and I keep bumping into people who either don't understand it or don't want to understand it. But I still think it's the best explanation of ethnicity in America. Australia is going to be similar. You moved there. Your grandfather stole Trevelyan's corn, so the young might see the morn, and now the prison ships lies waiting at the bay.
I'm from a noble line, actually, and soldiers.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm a first generation Australian, so I've come to actually, though I love this country and everything it's offered me, I've come to begin to identify less and less with what it is to be Australian, and feel that I don't really have a rightful claim to Australian identity in the same way that the descendants of those founders who were either British colonists or Irish prisoners, I don't feel that I have as much of a claim to the Australian identity as they do. And it's been an interesting journey for me because
what is the Australian identity?
Well,
what is it?
I think it's and maybe this is where we may disagree, but I think it's the descendants of the founders. They've become a race essentially who arrived here 200 years ago and have had children, and there have been many waves of immigrants and countless waves in recent years. But I don't think that you can just show up in a country and become. I don't think you can just arrive in America and become American. I think it takes time to fully integrate and become part of that racial group.
Well, the triple melting pot says it takes 3 generations to become an American.
Well, so I'm not Australian because I'm the first generation here.
Right. You would not be. You would be an immigrant. That's what you would be, and that's what my grandfather was. My grandfather came from Cork in 1900, and he was an Irishman. He was an Irishman living in America, and then his son married a German, and then I was born, and I'm an American. There's no question about it. I'm an American, but there's no such thing as a generic American. That's what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, understood.
That even ethnicity still perdures. It perdures as religion now, because you don't speak the language. My mother didn't speak German. My mother, my grandfather hardly spoke German. Now the Germans were here longer, so it was his father who came here as an immigrant. So he was removed from it. I remember I had an experience when I first started studying German in high school. I came home and I said, "Say something in German, Grandpa." And he said, "Letzte Nacht ani Moin, das war mein letzte," which is the Swabian dialect. And I couldn't understand a word that he said. Letzte Nacht habe ich gedacht, das war mein letzte would be Hochdeutsch, and that would be last night I thought it was my last, which is what his aunt used to say when she had a bad night. But I mean, this is lost on him. He lost the language. If you lose the language, you're not a German anymore. You're not. You're an American now because you grew up speaking English. You are the language. Your identity comes from your mother. And it's called die Muttersprache. It's the language you learn from your mother is what gives you your identity. That's what your identity is, because logos is the source. Logos is the source of your being, and it's also the source of your connection with reality. That's why it's important. That's why the language is important. So if you go to, well, I've been in Tanzania, I've been in Kenya, I've been East Africa, and if you go to Tanzania, there are 76 different ethnic groups there, and they all look exactly the same from my point of view. They all have black skin and black curly hair and thick noses and thick lips and so on and so forth, but they're all different ethnic groups because they speak different languages. That's the criterion. That's the criterion of identity, the criterion of ethnicity. Now, obviously, they live in a certain place. And if you live in a certain place, you eat a certain kind of food, you have certain kind of customs, and all of that is true. And that's all part of your identity. But the basis is your language. And that's why logos is important.
I would agree that language is probably the most foundational aspect of identity, but I don't know that it's the exclusive one. You know, would you say that this idea of ethnicity being best categorized as religious affiliation, as it is in the United States and Australia now, because we're speaking from the New World, you know, as European people of European heritage, we're in the New World, and America and Australia are both very young countries and very, very mixed up, and I guess all of Europe is very mixed up now as well. But I would argue that there are people in Ireland who are Irish through and through. Their entire history is in Ireland, their genetic makeup, they speak the Irish language, and they have absolutely a greater claim to Irish identity than perhaps me, because I don't speak the Irish language and I wasn't born there, although I'm genetically almost completely Irish. And and they have a greater claim to Irish identity than maybe a second generation Asian who's migrated to Ireland, grown up there, has the gorgeous accent, speaks the language, but is not genetically at all related to the people of Ireland.
Right. That is a very complicated issue about Ireland, and the collapse of Gaelic, the collapse of the Irish language has had severe consequences. I have a friend, Terry O'Riordan, who teaches the Irish language in Montana, and he could talk long and eloquently about that issue. Okay, that the English language brings with it certain types of thought patterns and certain types of philosophical concepts and so on and so forth. There's no question about it, and it had an effect on Ireland.
It's been imposed on us as a people.
Do you know the story about the Chinaman? Do you know the story about the Chinaman? Chinaman he's working in some sweat factory in Wuhan or something like that, and he's sick to death of the factory life. He's going to go someplace else, spins the globe, puts his finger down, it lands on Ireland. So the Chinaman goes to the encyclopedia, and what language do they speak there? They speak Gaelic, they speak Irish there. So he learns Irish, and then he flies to Dublin, gets off the plane, and starts talking Irish, and nobody understands him. Walks through Dublin, he's spent the whole day, he's completely exhausted, can't find anybody to talk to. So he walks into a pub, and he's sitting there at the pub, and it turns out the guy sitting next to him can speak Irish. And they're chattering away, and he's happy. The other guy's happy. He's amazed that a Chinaman can speak this way. And then the bartender looks at them after about 15 minutes. He turns, yells in the back to the cook. He says, "Joe, Patty's speaking Chinese."
I like it. It's a good story, but to me, it actually illustrates the weakness of the argument that that language is central to identity. Because by that standard, and I know it's an allegory and a joke, but by that standard, the Chinaman is more Irish than the bartender or the cook, who don't speak their own language. And let's
put it this way.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. My mother, my deceased mother, she died. It was 100 years old when she died. Is genetically 100% German. I would say I am 50% German, but I would say I am more German than my mother because I speak German. Is that so hard to understand? My mother could go over to Germany, and all the Germans speak English. But I mean, back then when I showed up, there were a lot of people didn't speak English, and I know I can get along over there. I fit in like, I don't want to exaggerate here, but I was like a hand in a glove. I felt more at home in Germany than I did in Philadelphia, to be
Yes.
perfectly honest with you,
Yeah.
because it all was so familiar to me. I felt I'd been here before. It was the food, it was everything. It was more familiar to me, but I had to learn the language, and I did learn the language. And I think, and at a certain point, they were Catholic. I came back to the Catholic faith when I was there. I spoke the language. They accepted me, and at a certain point, I was teaching at a gymnasium, and the principal came up to me and said, "Why don't you become a German?" I mean, I did. I've talked
legally,
about this before.
Did he mean
I
legally?
did become a German.
Yeah.
He meant basically I was teaching, I was getting paid according to a certain scale. You can become a civil servant. It's called Beamter. I could have become, if I became a German citizen, I could have become a Beamter, which means I would have been paid about twice as much as what I was being paid. I would have lifetime security and so on and blah, 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 the whole thing. And he suggested that I do that. And for some stupid reason, I came back to America because I felt that I was an American in some sense. I never felt more like an American than when I was in Germany. And when I came back, it was just one of those moments where I suddenly, and that's when I decided I'm going to get a PhD in American literature. That's why I came back, because I wanted to figure out what it meant to be an American.
And this is an interesting conundrum that many of us in the West face today, is because we do come from mixed heritage, we come from different worlds, and there are different sort of forces pulling at us and our identity. That you felt more German than your mother in Germany because you spoke the language and you were totally accepted and encouraged to become a German citizen, but something about your place of birth and the culture that you grew up in was pulling you home, and you identified more with being American. So, I think at the end,
I could have become a German. I could have become a German. Now, I'll tell you honestly, if I had become a German, I would not have written this book. Because in order to write this book, I had to write the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, and I could not have written that book over there.
No,
I could not have written that book over there.
You'd be writing it from a prison cell.
I mean, that's a big issue in Germany. It's one of the big sadnesses I had in my life, is basically an inability to talk to a German the way I'm talking to you. I mean, here we are at opposite ends of the world, and we're both thinking along the same lines. We're talking about logos. We both use the word logos. I mean, this is incredible in a way, and you're a lot farther away than Germany, but I just can't talk to the Germans. I cannot do this type of thing in Germany. It's impossible.
Yes, yeah,
that's part of the problem.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because you're an American. But you're speaking a language that came from the English. I'm an Irishman, but I'm speaking a language that came from the English, and the word logos is Greek. So we're a real mixed bag in Europe. And I think the nationalist movement of Europeans seems to be recognizing that we're so muddled up now that trying to separate ourselves along strict ethnic lines is a lost cause, and more identifying with Western civilization, Western culture, and the foundations of that, which are largely Greco-Roman legal and philosophical tradition, and Christianity as the religion. That seems to be the way we can identify ourselves collectively, in spite of those minor differences.
It's not an either or choice. It shouldn't be. I wrote a book called Ethnos Needs Logos. And it's about me spending a week in Guadalajara with David Duke, trying to convince him to become a Catholic. But it's also about Mexico. What does ethnicity mean in Mexico? It's also about the Jesuits in Paraguay. What did the Jesuits do? They preserved the Guarani as a nation, because the Guarani would have just died if the Jesuits hadn't come over and written their grammar and their dictionary for them.
Yeah.
This is what we have to have, that sense of transcendence and immanence at the same time.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I do, yes, yeah. I'm half Irish and half German, but that means that I can also read Greek and study Greek and write a book on philosophy, because that was part of the American experience. That was part. I mean, we've forgotten this. We are so sick of ugly Americans. I'm sick of ugly Americans, of these people like Mike Pompeo, this kind of crass, a guy who just a crude guy who brags about lying and throws his weight around and kisses butt when it comes to the Israelis. And it's disgusting. It's just disgusting. But there was a time when there was an American was someone who could have been a cultured person. This is what I grew up thinking. Go to let's talk about architecture.
Well, I want to warn you, we're approaching the hour. And you did warn me that if we go past an hour, you might say something that gives the ADL fodder.
Yeah, I know. So we'll reserve architecture for another time.
I would love to. I would love to talk about it with you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I think it's a miracle. This is the fruit of the American empire. It was a wicked empire. It's now going to end. But the fact that we all learned English and we can have conversations in English on the internet all over the world is the reason I wrote this book, because that's what this book is about. It's about speech. It's about the ability to speak to each other on a deeper level and what we have in common, because we're reaching the point where the entire world is going to have some type of common culture.
Yes, yeah, that seems to be the case, and may it be a good one with Logos and Christ at its center. Before we wrap it up, Dr. Jones, we've got a few super chats that I will read out because I did promise my audience that I would do that.
Okay.
The Kurgan, who I believe you've met, who is an evil man. He's spoiling for a biff with you on canonical law, and he actually emailed me a bunch of questions he wanted me to ask, but I had no intention of having a dogma debate with you. It's not my field by any stretch. But he has asked in his super chat, why doesn't he respect the Code of 1917 and thus consider the promoters of the Vatican II heresies heretics who vacated their office as per Canon 188, Part 4. Do with that as you will. The Kurgan has very strong... He did put in £4.99. So if you can say a few more words.
Good. God bless him. God bless him for putting that money in the tip jar. Good.
Thanks, Kurgan.
Okay, go ahead. Next question.
All right. Yeah, I really didn't think that was going to bear any fruit, but thanks anyway, Kurgan. Okay, Just Saying has thrown in $5 and says, what is more important in building a successful society, race or religion? I think we've talked about that already, but maybe you can add a few more comments.
Guess what? What do you think? Obviously, first of all, race is an illusion. It's a category of the mind that gets imposed on things that has... Religion. Answer religion. Okay. Next question.
Yeah. Philip Cunningham, $10 says, did the Catholic Church see the fascist powers as a bulwark against liberalism and communism?
Yes.
Hope that was worth $10 to you, Philip.
Quadragesimo anno. Let's put it this way. I'm going to get in trouble because I said that. We're
past the hour. Yeah.
What do you mean by fascist powers? You got three options here. You have Nazi Germany. Okay, that was not Christian. Okay, but Graf von Galen saw them as a bulwark against Jewish Bolshevism. So they saw positive aspects there. Mm-hmm. Wanted to try and have a modus vivendi. Didn't work out. You have fascists in Italy, Mussolini, corporatism, trying to do something along the lines of Quadragesimo Anno. I think Fanfani's book shows that there was a common groping towards some type of common understanding of the new economics at that point. And then you have Spain, which was perfectly congruent with the Catholic Church. So it depends on which, and then you have Croatia, and then you have Stepinac, Cardinal Stepinac and the Ustasha, and how did he deal with that? It depends on who you're talking about.
So as Jordan B. Peterson might put it, it depends on what you mean by fascism.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly it.
And of course, we live in such a hysterical, politically correct world now that if you say anything positive from any perspective about fascism, then you're literally Hitler. So look out.
No, it's ridiculous. We have to break these taboos and talk honestly about these issues.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate how much you've been leading the way in that regard, Dr. Jones. We have one final super chat from Eyes of the Wolf 101, threw in $20. Thank you, very generous. Says, that umbrella guy, a YouTuber, was kicked off Twitter for reporting pedos. Considering that James and E. Michael Jones criticize degeneracy and sexual liberation, this will make more people sympathetic to your message. I'm not sure actually what he means by this, but there's no question in there.
Who's the umbrella guy?
I have no idea.
But
it seems to me that Eyes of the Wolf would like me to look into that, so I'm going to open that in a new tab and check it out later on. And I'll get back to you on that, Eyes of the Wolf. And that concludes our super chat. So nice tight little session there, and we're only 4 minutes over the hour, so I don't think you've put your foot in it fully yet, Dr. Jones.
No, I haven't said anything ridiculous yet, so I better get out of here while the getting's good.
All right. Well, it's been a real pleasure meeting you and speaking to you today.
My pleasure.
All right, and I hope we can do it again. I'd love to have that chat about architecture, starting from the Taj Mahal and working our way back to Rome.
Yes, I'd love to do it.
Excellent. All right, well, God bless. Have a great day, and thanks everyone for watching this 143rd episode of the James Fox Higgins Show. That's it for me for the week, so I will see you all again on Monday at the usual time. God bless. Take care. Stay at home, and stay clean. Bye-bye. I'm James Fox Higgins. I'm a musician, writer, podcaster, I'm a husband and father, and I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. But it wasn't always so. I had a lot of interests as a kid, but I knew from very early on that I wanted to be a husband and father. I also knew from very young that I was going to be a musician. When I was 8, I decided that I was going to be a disciple of Jesus. My parents were walking away from the faith and religion of their ancestors, and everything in my being told me that Jesus was my guy. He was Lord. So I asked to be baptized. And I asked for a trumpet. In the 20 years that followed, I pursued my dreams of a life of music with all my heart. I taught myself to play piano, guitar, and to sing. And then I started recording music to a 4-track tape recorder and figured out the basics of every instrument I could get my hands on. I started performing, and while I was still in high school, I began doing my first paid gigs at parties, weddings, and art galleries. I formed a band with my high school crush, and we eventually continued our study, wrote an album, and straight out of university we toured it overseas, achieving a taste of success by opening for our idols Jamiroquai and Brand New Heavies at a festival in Europe. Then the lead singer and I split up, and I found myself alone, deep in debt from a poorly managed European tour, and with no clue how to move forward. It was in this time of great decay and renewal that I met the woman I was soon after to marry, and the happiest season of my life began. We made our vows, and less than 2 years later had our first son. A second boy followed 4 years later, and I was now working with dignity as a wedding singer, supporting the family of my dreams. But something was still missing. I made a few albums in those times, some that I'm still very proud of as musical achievements, but outside of singing covers at weddings, making great music with my friends, and singing my emotions, I felt that there was a deeper truth that was eluding me, and that I would never unlock my full musical or vocal potential unless I found it. By this point, Christianity and religion in general seemed so ridiculous to me that it couldn't be what I was looking for. I was well and truly of the world. Feeling lost again, I took a huge step away from songwriting at this point and started reading, listening to podcasts, and pursuing knowledge like never before. I reconnected with my best friend Rob and met a new friend Sven, both of whom are also on the path of learning and the pursuit of truth. We started a podcast and YouTube channel together called The Rational Rise, and my soul felt alive again as I moved towards that third elusive thing that had been missing. I had the family and I had the music, though I wasn't writing my own anymore. I was instead now writing philosophical science fiction novels, another one of those childhood dreams, taking all my perceptions and learnings about politics, philosophy, religion, and history, and weaving them into an epic apocalyptic universe of my own creation. But I still lived apart from my own creator, the Lord Jesus, who I gave my life to at the age of 8. A year into the casual podcasting, something cracked in my soul, and in the depths of a great existential crisis, Jesus revealed himself to me once more and invited me to follow him again. I took up the call and recommitted my life to Jesus. By God's grace, my wife, who had been as atheistic as I, also came to Christ, and we were baptized together at our local church. the three truths of my childhood were once again aligned. I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm a husband and father, I'm a musician. Now, it's time to bring those three God-given paths together, and the Lord has given me my first original collection of songs in almost 5 years, all dedicated to His glory. I'm James Fox-Higgins, and these are my songs of faith and nation. A new album for 2020, Logos Rising. This album is the passion project of my life. I'm asking for your help to make it a great success, both creatively and in its impact in the world to help build the kingdom of God. This album brings together my 25 years of study and practice as a musician with my more recent years of philosophical and historical study, and tells the story of my own restoration of faith, as well as that of the rise and fall of Western civilization, and the coming renaissance that will restore our reconnection to history, land, family, nation, and God. Logos Rising is a tribute to my ancestors and a collection of anthems for the European nations. We live in very troubling times where our people, the European peoples, are struggling to maintain a place of honour and dignity in our very own homelands. The coronavirus crisis that we're facing today demonstrates the fragility of the global system, and we are right now at the dawn of what will clearly be a new and very difficult time. There has never been a greater need for hope in the world. And so I'm really thrilled to have finally finished writing my fourth studio album, and for it to be intentionally for the glorification of God and to sing songs that will uplift, support, encourage, and embolden the European peoples. These are my songs of faith and nation. The artwork you see is just a mock-up at this stage. We'll be working with professional artists to develop a beautiful piece of artwork which will be in the style of medieval illuminated manuscripts, drawing stylistically from the Book of Kells. The intricate details of the cover art will tell the story of the album, with characters and icons woven together in a unified narrative. Now a quick tour of the tracks and what you can expect from this album. The opening track is my musical rendition of the Lord's Prayer, with a powerful and uplifting gospel twist. The second track is lead single Turn Me Up, which I wrote with LA producers David Ott, my friend, and Neil Pogue, who has produced music with Outkast, TLC, Nelly Furtado, and many others. This song was originally written for release by Earth, Wind & Fire, and in fact it features Verdine White on the bass guitar and other members of the Earth, Wind & Fire troupe. It also features the Regiment Horns, who are well known for touring and recording with Bruno Mars and Justin Timberlake. And though this song was written for Earth, Wind & Fire, the tragic and untimely death of Maurice White in 2016 put this project on the shelf until eventually it was gifted to me. I feel very blessed to include it on this album.
Turn me up, come on and turn me up. I am ready to see what you've got to say. Turn me up, come on and turn me up. Turn me up, never turn me down again.
Next is a song I wrote called God Who Gave Me Life, the first song that I wrote after giving my life to Jesus Christ. From my opening prayer and the story of my personal conversion, we now delve into the history of man with a song called Theory of Mind, written by my friend Lindsay Nishizawa, an Australian-Japanese songwriter who lives and works in Tokyo. This song tells the story of man from the perspective of an unlikely character, the apple in the Garden of Eden. Continuing the historical and mythological themes, we now move to a track called The Rape of Europa. This song is based on a flamenco composition by my friend Rob McMullen, a song called El Arco de Ronda, which I've converted into a ballad telling the tale of the Phoenician princess Europa and her kidnapping and rape by the bull that Zeus disguised himself as. In this song I draw parallels to the experience of the native European peoples in the midst of the largest scale migration of peoples, unprecedented in all of human history, that we face today.
Our mother, their crime. Europa will avenge you in time. Oh, Europa, the fair. They killed our fathers, made us unaware. A gentle genocide. Europa will avenge you in time.
Standing in the Cold is a gritty blues R&B track that reminds us that no matter how bad our personal situation is, the Lord is always with us. The Door, an affirmation of my faith and commitment to Jesus Christ that I wrote with a friend shortly after converting. Exploring my own ancestry, next we have Irish folk songs. The traditional song, The Minstrel Boy.
Love song set the warrior born, though all the world betrays thee. One sword at least thy right shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee.
Followed by Celtic rock cabaret ballad, The Northerners.
Northern Empire was rocked to his very core. 'Twas Satan leading northern men to colonize the world. But sorry wasn't good enough. Minority isn't large enough. Diversity isn't strong enough. And northerners are to blame. The Northerners. The Northerners are hopeless. The Northerners are broken. The Northerners are hopeless. The Northerners are broken. The Northerners are homeless. The Northerners are broken.
Everybody knows sings of the spiritual warfare which has been raging since the dawn of man and will continue to the very end of days.
So why do we lie to ourselves today that we don't need a God? But everyone will rise when we're through, but the battlefield's calling to you. Not everybody fights for the Lord. The demons we're fighting are cold. And I know that the world will call me crazy, but I'm not of the world, and I know that your love is real.
And closing the album, a triumphant celebration of faith in an original gospel song, Hallelujah, He is Lord.
Lord, I need you. Use my voice. It's never been like I've had a choice, because you chose me to sing your praise. Now let your will be done. Do it all for the rest of my days.
With the writing of this album now complete, I'm asking you to help support the production of the album. If you commit to buying a copy of it now or supporting it in a greater way, there are many excellent perks available through our Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign. Then you will be helping me to continue my daily James Fox Higgins shows, streaming to YouTube. You'll also be helping to bring truth, goodness, and beauty into the world in the form of new, God-glorifying music. Now, what will the money be used for? That's a very fair question to ask. We're looking to raise a good chunk of cash here to produce this album, and so the money is going to be used to hire the best session musos available to me. I've already been very lucky to have some of the world's best musicians playing on the track Turn Me Up, including Verdine White from Earth, Wind & Fire, but I'd like to bring the rest of the album up to that same standard. I play a lot of instruments, but I haven't mastered every single one of them, and I want to get the best players in to play the tracks. I also want to make all of the vocal arrangements stand out in a unique and powerful way by having a huge choir, which is going to mean that I need to hire a whole bunch of professional gospel singers to record this album with me. I also wish to get a string section to really lift up the epic songs and make them sound more orchestral, more powerful, and to the highest standard to, again, celebrate the Western tradition of classical music mixed in with these modern soul, R&B, funk, blues, cabaret, rock, flamenco styles that are across the album. There'll be a lot of people involved and a lot of people to pay. I also want to pay the artists to create the most amazing cover art that we can possibly come up with. And then at the end of the process, we'll need to mix the thing. So I want to get the absolute best mix engineers involved and master it to perfection before we press it to CD and to vinyl and release to digital as well. Aside from all of those costs, there's my time. It will take days and days and days for me to finish this album. So having the funds to do that will mean that I can turn my attention away from chasing other sorts of work and focus on developing this album and making a great impact in the world by shining its light, its truth, its goodness, and its beauty. If we can raise the full amount, then I can do it to the absolute highest standard. If we raise the full amount, I can press it to vinyl for those who wish to have an heirloom collection in a format that will present it in the most beautiful and large print way and the best sound, analog quality sound. Part of the budget will also go towards the production and post-production on a documentary video series taking you through the entire process of recording from start to finish. Each song will have its own episode explaining the meaning and the writing process behind the song, showing the musicians who performed on it, and taking you behind the scenes in the production process. If we don't reach the target, I'll just have to make some compromises. I may not be able to hire all the excellent musicians that I want to. I may have to do more of the mixing myself. I may have to let go of the idea of having it pressed to vinyl. These are the compromises that we'll have to make with a lower budget. But if we can hit the target or exceed it, which we can with your help if you share this around and tell lots and lots of people about it, we can raise those funds, get this record into the hands of many people, and let these songs inspire us to really shine Jesus' light in the world and also speak the truth about the future of our people. Help me to make Logos Rising the best album it can be. Help me to bring joy, hope, and inspiration into the hearts of Christians and Europeans around the world who are facing these very difficult times in a world fallen into darkness. From just $10, you can secure your copy of the album as I begin production, and higher levels of support will be met with excellent perks. This is my Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign for Logos Rising. I'm James Fox Higgins, and thank you for your support.